What up, James? I wish you could have stayed longer. I heard you had to get a train. That sucks, but I saw you earlier, so that's awesome. And I hope you like the show. I can't wait to see your pictures. You know you are always welcome to bring your fancy-ass camera every time you come to a show. And you always look dapper. You always look awesome. So, I'll see you soon.
That was Chrissy Costanza of Against the Current, and I am James Lynd of James Lynd Photography. And I have had the most insane couple of weeks. After about a 5-month hiatus, I've finally been back photographing concerts again. And who better than Against the Current, the band that literally got my career going. If we were to backtrack to 2014, it was their first show in Manchester Roadhouse.
Roadhouse.
That too. Which is where it all began for me. There was a particular moment during the finale, Another You, Another Way, when Chrissy, who you saw at the start, basically hopped up to the front of the stage and was basically just reaching out to the audience, just, you know, doing her thing. And at one point, she like clasped onto my hand, which I had obviously in the air, waving around. And it was as if like time had stood still, and out of nowhere, I just had this really like surreal epiphany where I was just like, I want to photograph moments like this. Like, this is just amazing. And I went home that very day and bought my first camera. So that was where it all began. And had it not been for that moment and all of the support I've received from Against the Current and their fan base over the years, I probably would have given up long ago. I mean, it was Against the Current that got me my first photo passes, and, well, not official photo passes, but they said I could come down to the show and take photos. And, you know, they were the third concert I ever photographed, and without those kind of opportunities, I would never have been able to practice and get as good as I have. And to be able to be reunited with them down in London, meeting some of the international fans who've become like friends online over the years, who've always had my back, always supported me, always uplifted me. Like, if it weren't for you guys, I would literally have given up years ago. So having you guys just constantly like encouraging me and supporting me has meant so much, and to have actually like met some of you people down in London at the show was so cool. Like, I cannot put into words like how cool that weekend was. And to have photographed Against the Current for the 6th time was such a cool experience. So to commemorate that, I'm going to finally get out this video on how you guys can also photograph concerts. Things like what kind of gear you need, what settings to use, and what like the rules and etiquettes are and stuff. Also putting together an editing tutorial as well, which will be exclusively for my Patreon subscribers. So if you want to see how I edit my concert photos and pick up some tips on how to just improve them even more, then go and click on the link down below. It'll be available to anyone subscribing at $5 or more. And you'll also get access to a bunch of like presets and other tutorials and stuff. So if you want to learn photography, go down and get subscribed, and it all goes back into helping my business and helping me create content for you guys. So let's get to it. If you want to be able to create concert photos like this, or this, or this, I'm going to show you how now. So let's do this. Okay, so the first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to invest in some equipment. You don't have to spend thousands per se. If you want to get into it seriously, you are going to end up spending a lot of money. I've spent literally about 10 grand on various bits of camera equipment, specifically with music photography in mind, because you're working in like low light conditions and things like that, which you do just need the better equipment for. But you can do it pretty cheap as well. My first camera was the Canon 100D, which was beautiful for what I needed it for, and using a 50mm lens on it, that whole setup cost less than 500 quid. So you can do it pretty cheap, but the important thing is that you need a camera with a good sensor, because if you are working in low light, you need something that's going to be capable of capturing as much of the detail as possible in those low lighting situations. So you need a camera with a good sensor. I primarily shoot now with the 5D Mark IV and the 5D Mark III, which are both very expensive cameras. Not as expensive as some of them can get, but still very expensive. But they are genuinely amazing. Like, if you are trying to get into it seriously, I would definitely recommend the 5D Mark IV. But you will need to invest thousands for it. And then you will need a series of lenses that have a very wide aperture. The aperture is basically like the iris of the lens. Well, technically it's like, well, yeah, the iris, I was going to say pupil, but it is technically like the iris, and it will change its size to let in various amounts of light. And if you are in a very dark concert room, you need to be able to let in as much light as possible. So a lot of the lenses I use have apertures that are like f2.8 or f1.8, and they are perfect for what you need. The downside is that to get these kind of lenses is expensive. Like my 24 to 70mm cost about £1,600. It was very expensive, but honestly it's so worth it. It is so dynamic, it creates amazing wide angle shots, gives you the flexibility to zoom in as well and get those like portrait shots as well. Honestly, a beautiful lens. I wholeheartedly recommend it, but it is very expensive. If you do want a cheaper option, then you can go for prime lenses. Prime lenses are lenses that don't zoom, so you don't have the flexibility of being able to like zoom in and out with them, which I personally don't like. Concerts are very fast paced, so you want to be able to do things very quickly. So if you are using prime lenses, you might want several camera bodies to be able to sort of switch between real quick. I generally just stick to my zoom lenses because I can literally just use the one and just change it how and when I need it. So here's the list of all of the things that I have shot with over the years, and I can definitely recommend any one of these as a worthy purchase for concert photography. The camera bodies are all great in low light and have really quick focusing, which is really important as well if you're shooting concerts, because obviously things are moving around real quick. You need to be able to focus in the low light real quick. So everything that I'm about to show you, I 100% recommend, and you can usually pick them up on things like Amazon and stuff, or on the actual brand website. And I'm a Canon fanboy, so all my gear is Canon, but you can also get things like Sigma and Tamron if you're looking for a slightly cheaper option as well. So check it out. There are certain rules and etiquette when it comes to photographing a concert. The first being that you will usually need a photo pass to gain access to the venue, which you will usually get if you are shooting on behalf of either one of the bands playing or a publication that needs to get the shots, in which case they will arrange for you to get a photo pass, which you pick up at the box office when you arrive. And that gains you access to the venue. It allows you to bring in a professional camera. Professional cameras are generally considered anything with a removable lens, and that is pretty much essential for any major venue if you want to get your camera in. Some smaller venues aren't too fussy, but if in doubt, try and get in touch with someone and just double check. The last thing you want is to show up on the door and be turned away because you've got camera gear, or be told to leave it in like a cloakroom or anything, because if you spent a lot of money on camera gear, the last place you want to leave it is in a cloakroom. So that'd be the first thing. You need to get some sort of photo pass arrangement. You need to basically get it agreed that you should be there with your camera gear. A great way to do that is to get in touch with the bands, particularly smaller bands, because they are usually more than happy to have photographers down to get photos for them. So that's always a great way to start out if you are starting out as a music photographer looking to build your portfolio. Once you pick up your photo pass, you usually get given a set of terms and conditions that you're allowed to shoot by. Traditionally, you're allowed to photograph the first 3 songs of the set, and that'll be it. You're not allowed to photograph any of the other songs. If you're found photographing the other songs, you'll be told to stop. You may even be asked to leave at that point, which is the last thing that you want or need. And the other rule is no flash. You're not allowed to use a flash because obviously the band doesn't need to be distracted by dozens of photographers flashing with their cameras, or the crowd themselves don't need that flashes going off. Like, you've got the stage lights, that's enough. So with that in mind, I have never made it a habit to ever photograph any concert in any venue with a flash. I don't see the point in my eyes, because if those are just the rules of bigger venues. Bigger venues will not let you use a flash. So even at smaller, really dark venues, I generally don't use a flash. I try and make the best of the lighting that's available, because I think it is good practice. You need to learn how to work in the most awkward lighting conditions, and if you're using a flash, it's a little bit of a cheat and doesn't benefit you in the long run, because you will not be allowed to use them at the bigger shows anyway. So I generally don't bother using the flash. And like I said, it's very important to stick to the rules set out by the terms of your photo pass, because you will get removed from the venue if you are caught breaking those rules. It's as simple as that. And that's not what you need. It's not good for your reputation, and ultimately you will miss out on photo opportunities anyway. 3 songs is usually more than enough to get what you need. Sometimes you'll be allowed to photograph for the entire set, and if that's what you want, then feel free to go for it. But generally, it's going to be the 3-song rule, and 3 songs is more than enough once you know what you're doing anyway, so I wouldn't stress out about it. Just enjoy it, and then you can sit back and just watch the rest of the show and just enjoy the show. Other etiquettes as well, of course, is try not to get in the way of the crowd too much. People are there to enjoy the concert. They're not there to enjoy a photographer getting in the way and jumping up on stage and doing anything they can to get the shot. You've got to bear in mind that of the people who should be there, photographers are pretty low on the list. We are there to just sort of capture the images. We're not really there to add anything else to the show, so be low key. You should be kind of like a ninja. Try and stay out of the way to an extent. Obviously, you will have to be doing your thing, so you are going to be in the way a little bit, but just try and minimize it, be conscious of it, because you want people to enjoy the show. And that's kind of why the 3-song rule exists, is so that we do our thing and then we get out of the way so everyone else can actually enjoy the show. Just be considerate, basically, of the people around you. Other photographers as well, like, try not to get in the way of other photographers. Generally, like, if you're going to cross in front of a photographer, try and duck down. Just we're all working as a team, so just be very conscious of what's going on around you. Whenever I'm photographing, I'm aware of what's in my peripheral vision. As I move around, you get into the habit of being able to like move around while still sort of like seeing at your periphery. So if you see someone there, you're able to sort of be like, right, duck down and that kind of thing. So for the most part, it's just obey the rules and be nice to people. Like, just be considerate and don't get in the way. Don't go up on stage if you don't have permission to be there. Just the basic things, really. Like, just be respectful of the fact that you are there to do your job and your job only. Like, that doesn't give you free access to just do what you like. So just be respectful of everyone around you and everything will go fine. Next thing to consider is the venue itself. I find it very important to scope out the venue as soon as possible to figure out things like the lighting and where the best angles might be. And it can also be helpful just to spend a bit of time just getting to chat with the staff, like the security and the lighting guys and people like that, who may be able to give you some insight on, they work the place every day, so they know what the best angles are, what the best lighting is, and just little things like that. So they may be able to give you some good pointers. I've had it before where security have been like, well, if you go over to that corner, you will get a sick shot of just little things like that. So what I normally do is I will get down to the venue early. As soon as I get in, there's not a huge amount of people there. I can kind of just mill about and just get to know the place a bit. And I'll just look around. I'll look in like the corners, see where the lights are, see what kind of lights they are, so I have an idea of how well lit the stage will be. And then I can start considering what my settings are going to be, which will vary depending on the venue, because like I photographed in places from like dingy pub basements with like just a side table lamp lighting the stage, straight up to arenas which are so well lit that I pretty much always overexpose my photos because I'm so unused to it. So you will get everything along the spectrum from basically a pitch black room straight through to basically a Christmas parade in terms of how well lit it is. So it's important to get down to the venue and scope it out and just see what's what. It's also important to find out whether there's actually a barrier in front of the stage and therefore a photo pit that you can photograph from, because if there is, obviously you don't need to worry so much. You can just go into the photo pit and do your work there. But if there isn't a barrier, you're going to need to really think about what your strategy is. Are you going to stand in the crowd at the front to get your shots? Are you going to stand in the crowd in the middle to get your shots? 10 out of 10 would not recommend that, by the way, because I've been caught up in mosh pits before, and that is not what you need when you've got lots of expensive camera equipment. Or are you going to go off to the side, or there may be some stairs at the back that you can shoot from, or maybe a balcony? You just got to be thinking of these things and knowing what the options are for what you're photographing, as well as where you're actually allowed to be, because let's say there is a balcony. It might be closed off. You might not actually be allowed to go up there, which is again why it's helpful to chat with the staff and just see what the options are before you start shooting. So my tips: get down early, check out the lighting, and find out what the best angles are. Now this other tip kind of falls into my next category of what settings to use, but this is such an important point that I wanted to give it its own segment, and that is to shoot in RAW every time. If you don't know what RAW is, it's basically a camera file format, kind of like JPEG, but JPEG doesn't really capture that much information, whereas RAW captures a lot of information about the actual light environment that you're photographing in, and that means that when you import into Lightroom has so much more information to actually work from in terms of your editing, and that means that you can really salvage photos that are underexposed or overexposed, which by the way you will end up getting. I've shot concerts where I've looked back at the photos and been like, they are all overexposed because I misjudged the lighting and little things like that. And if I'd been shooting in JPEG, they would be ruined, that set is gone. But shooting in RAW has allowed me to actually completely save those photos. So it's essential. Don't be one of those people that shoots JPEG. I mean, I always shoot RAW. There's literally no reason not to, really. The files do take up a lot more space than a JPEG because it's capturing more information, and you will probably need bigger and faster memory cards to be able to accommodate that adequately, which obviously get a little bit more expensive. As I said earlier, it is going to get expensive, but there's no reason not to. If you're taking it remotely seriously and you want to capture those amazing shots, you need to be shooting in RAW. Okay, so you've got to the venue, you've picked up your photo pass from the box office, you've had a quick look around and you've got a feel for the place, and now you stood in the side of the photographer's pit ready to photograph the show. But what settings do you want to be using? First and foremost, I always shoot in manual no matter what I'm doing. I like to have that kind of control over what I'm doing, and I wholeheartedly recommend shooting in manual. Particularly with concerts, I feel personally that it's important to be able to adjust the three parameters, your aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. I feel like it's important to be able to adjust those manually personally. If you want to shoot in auto, then you do you, but I personally prefer to do it this kind of way. So normally I'd start off with my aperture, which I would make sure is as wide open as it can be, which for most of my lenses is f2.8, so I'll usually dial them to f2.8. With aperture, the lower the number, the wider the aperture is, and therefore the more light that it's going to let in. Therefore, let's say f2.8 is a wider aperture than f20, which would be a very narrow aperture and wouldn't let in that much light. So I immediately get the aperture as wide as it will go because I want to get in as much light as possible in that dark concert room. Then I would go to my shutter speed. I usually try and go for a setting that allows me to shoot at about a shutter speed of 250, because that will basically allow you to capture a reasonably sharp image, like there's not too much motion blur. Sometimes you might want a bit of stylistic motion blur added in which case you'd want to knock the shutter speed down, but that's not my style. I don't like it. I like those really sharp dynamic images. So I find that around about 250 will pretty much always pull that off unless the artist is really throwing themselves around. And then once you've got that set, it's just about figuring out what ISO exposure you want to set it to. In which case, you just look at the exposure meter on your camera and get it so that the arrow's pretty much in the middle. If you don't know what the exposure meter is, it's usually seen when you look through the viewfinder. There's like a little line at the bottom with little dashes on it, going from like -3 to 0 and then up to +3. And there's usually a little arrow that goes underneath it. And basically you want the arrow as close to 0 as possible for what's considered like an ideal exposure. I personally, when it comes to contests, I try and underexpose a little bit, because it's easier to pull up the shadows and things like that in the post-processing in Lightroom than it is to bring back an overexposed image. So I definitely recommend underexposing your shots a little bit. But what the ISO will end up being will really depend on the venue itself. If it's a well-lit venue, it could be down as low as 3200. If it's a dark venue, you might be knocking it right up and having to accept the grain that will come with it. And grain is the bane of my life, so obviously you want to try not to take the setting too high. If need be, you can adjust the shutter speed down a little bit to try and bring the ISO down so you don't have as much grain. You can usually get away with maybe 160 if you still want pretty sharp images. Anything more than that, it's going to get a little bit blurry. It can also depend on how energetic the show is as well. Like if your artists are pretty static, you can obviously lower the shutter speed a bit more because they're not going to be moving quite so much. Most shows are pretty fast paced though, so you're not going to have quite the same flexibility in that sense. But it's just about getting that exposure correct. So I always underexpose with a wide aperture and a shutter speed of around 250. One thing to do be careful of though is to never put your shutter speed too high, because if you get past, I think it's like 700 or 1000, it will start to create lines in your photos, because basically the way that the lighting is and the way that your shutter's going across the image will just cast these weird sort of shadows, and you'll get really bizarre effects that will just ruin the photo, and it's difficult, if not impossible, to fix that in post. Like it takes hours and is usually not worth it to actually do anything about that. If anyone does have a quick way of fixing that in Lightroom, please let me know, because I would love to know. But yeah, in general, a shutter speed of 250 is the way to go. Okay, so you've photographed the show, hopefully had an amazing time, and you've got yourself home, imported the photos and backed them up. And now it's just down to the editing to make those shots look as beautiful as possible. Now, I'm not actually going to go into that as part of this tutorial. I'm actually going to save that for the Patreon exclusive tutorial that I've already mentioned. If you want to figure out how to edit your photos, I'd definitely recommend subscribing to my Patreon. You also get access to a bunch of concert presets that I've developed specifically for music photography, and they're really good, particularly if you've got shots that are like a little bit overexposed, or if they're like very saturated with a particular color of lighting. They're really good at like salvaging those kind of photos, so it's well worth picking up. So yeah, if you head on down to the links below, you'll be able to find the link to my Patreon. Get yourself subscribed to $5 or more, and you will gain access to these presets as well as my concert tutorials, so you'll find out how to glow up those images. I'm going to reveal a few little secrets that I've been sitting on for a few years, so it's well worth subscribing. You'll also get access to a bunch of other tutorials on how to create other photos and do things beyond the scope of music photography, like I do a lot of fantasy portraits and things like that as well. So all in all, it's a great way to support me and gain access to a wealth of resources that will help you develop your own photography as well. If you look down below, you will also see links to my social media, so go down and follow me on Twitter and Instagram. You are welcome to ask me any specific questions you have there. I always do my best to answer them. You can also ask in the comments down below on this video, and I will always do my best to answer any of your questions as quickly as possible. And of course, you'll also find down below the little subscribe button, so make sure you subscribe to my channel for more videos like this if you found it helpful, and be sure to give it a cheeky little like as well. And I will see you at the next one, and hopefully catch you on my Patreon as well. So take care guys, and have fun photographing your concerts.